Thank you for tuning in to the Catch a Lift Fund's Coach's Corner podcast. We hope you enjoy today's episode and will consider supporting the Catch a Lift Fund and the veterans we serve. Visit our website for more information about our programs at catchaliftfund.org. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis or suicidal thoughts, please call 988 or the Veterans Crisis Line 988, followed immediately by the number 1. The views and opinions expressed during the Coach's Corner podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the Catch a Lift Fund. The Catch a Lift Fund does not verify or warrant the truth or accuracy of statements made during the podcast, and statements therein are not to be construed as an official policy or position of the Catch a Lift Fund. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and nothing herein should be construed as health, medical, or other professional advice. The Coach's Corner is a place for veterans to connect, heal, and share their stories. I'm Melissa Luke, the host of the Coach's Corner podcast. I am a U.S. Army Iraq War veteran, coach, and program director for the Catch a Lift Fund. The Coach's Corner is sponsored by ID Technologies. Welcome to this week's episode of the Coach's Corner. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited to welcome Cal veteran athlete and Coast Guard veteran Aaron Bean to the show. Welcome to this week's episode of the Coach's Corner. Aaron, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here today. Thanks for coming on and talking with us today. We've got a lot to get to, so we'll jump right into it, Aaron. Aaron, you were working as an EMT on 9/11. Talk to us about that day.
Yes, September 11th, 2001, I was 19 years old. I had been doing some clinical rotations where I was doing first aid and CPR and medical transports. And I was under the tutelage of a New York City firefighter veteran who, when we were attacked, he kind of changed the tone of our training and our responsibilities, focused us up on terrorism. And my house in Colorado was out in the middle of nowhere, and my parents locked doors, which was unusual. My parents loaded guns. They were really belligerent. My dad said to me as a 19-year-old, he said, the only honorable thing for you to do would be to join the military. And I had already made it a goal to do that. I wanted to go to the Naval Academy. I wasn't really prepared for college. So my mom convinced me that if I enlisted, I might get a spot as an enlisted man at the academy. So I recruited myself into the Coast Guard just a month later after that.
That's incredible. Looking back on 9/11, Aaron, what do you remember most about that day?
It was a normal day for me. I got to school. I got to work. I kept my ear to the ground. I wanted to know what was going on. The thing that I remember most was just the way people lit candles and put them in their windows, and just the way that the country became unified. That was really powerful for me. That day, it was a long day. And another thing, so I was 19 years old. My parents, they opened beers and gave me beers. It was like a rite of passage. Like something had happened, and my parents knew that they could contribute to improving American society by letting me enlist. And it was a big day. And not only me, but like all my peers, they all joined as well. I got Andrew Parmalee. Shout out to my buddy Andrew. He joined the Air Force and eventually went blue to green and was in Iraq as a Army combat medic. And then my buddy Jared, he joined the Marine Corps. he was an embassy guard at embassies all over the world, and those were my closest friends. And I didn't really have a discussion with them, but they saw me, take the step, and they followed right behind me, and it was like that for my whole peer group.
I think it's safe to say, for at least for the majority, I think of post 9/11 veterans, we were all affected greatly by that day in different ways. And I think it definitely changed us, mentally, emotionally to some degree. Like I was in was I ninth or 10th grade when it happened, but up to that point, I always knew I was going to go. I was going to join the Army, but it changed my mentality a great deal. And at that point, I'm like, no, I not only do I want to join, I want to go and be in the fight, right? How do you think that day kind of changed you mentally or emotionally?
Well, it was, like I said, a rite of passage. And when I joined, I knew I wasn't going to be in the fight because I joined the Coast Guard. I knew that I was going to be at home, but our homeland was attacked, and so
yes.
That was important to me to be, to be stateside, to be domestically located, because that threat was real. And while I was on active duty, the Coast Guard formed the Department of Homeland Security, and that was a really big deal. It was the second largest governmental shift since the formation of the Department of Defense, and I got a plaque from the commandant as a plank owner in the Department of Homeland Security. And we took on new missions, and I did Homeland Security patrols, and I watched other nations. I watched England get attacked, their subway stations, and on that same day that London was attacked in July, I think it was 2005. I was on some of my greatest rescue missions. They sent us out on just a Homeland Security patrol over the Exxon Valdez of the Alaskan pipeline, and that's where we found a distressed pilot who he crashed his aircraft, and we were able to pick him up and bring him to Elmendorf Air Force Base and get him to safety. So it definitely changed my life. The whole country changed, and you see it now, like how large the Department of Homeland Security is, and what their roles are, and what the organizations that got folded into it. It was a major shift, and a rite of passage for me. And I feel like I have a feather in my cap just being a plank owner of the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. Thank you for sharing with us about that. And you've kind of touched on it, I think, already, right? Like, you wanted to be, protecting the U.S., you wanted to be domestic like that. But can you talk to us a little bit about that drive to enlist in the Air Force, or what really pushed that?
Yeah. So as an EMT, I was sitting through a lot of lectures, and my instructor, the New York City firefighter veteran, he told me about a lecture that he sat through with a bunch of physicians. He went to a lecture on cold weather emergencies. It was hypothermia specifically, and all these doctors, had a lot to say about it. But there was one physician in particular, Dr. Nemiroff, who, before he even said anything to the audience, he played a slideshow of a Coast Guard helicopter and a little girl who had drowned in the Great Lakes. They show the Coast Guard helicopter getting closer and closer to her, and then they show Dr. Nemiroff jumping out and rescuing this little girl. And she survived miraculously. She was face out in water, unconscious, and he applied heat packs to her and revived her. And the only real injuries she had were burns from how hot the heat packs were. But this little girl survived this trauma. And then Dr. Nemiroff speaks. He said, "Look, you guys all have read all these books, you've treated all these patients, but that's me in the field, pulling cold weather emergencies out of danger." And so that type of experience was something that I was really looking forward to. And at the time, the Coast Guard was part of the Department of Transportation. DOT is who administers EMT curriculum. So I thought, what better way to get EMT experience, like Dr. Nimiroff, than
Right.
to participate in the Department of Transportation in one of the largest organizations in the DOT. And so I enlisted in the Coast Guard. And, you know, to go full circle, I was already an EMT. I went through Coast Guard EMT school. You know, I did excellent in their training program. But about 3 months before I got out of the Coast Guard, I had to go to EMT recert. I had to recertify as an EMT. And when I went to Petaluma, California, Dr. Nimiroff actually came to the training center and he taught a section on hypothermia. And I got to, he had this huge vat of ice water, and he had me put my head in the water, and they like checked my vagal response and, you know, monitor my respirations and heart rate and stuff. And it was just really cool to, you know, meet the guy that really truly inspired me to join the Coast Guard. So that,
Oh my gosh.
that's really what pushed me, was Dr. Nimiroff and my EMS experience.
That's absolutely incredible. And to think, you know, that you got to meet this person, right, that you saw on a video and really lit that fire and, you know, this is what I want to do. You know, I want to be like that. That's absolutely incredible.
It was wild.
So I want to talk to you more about the Coast Guard. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you're the first veteran that I've had the pleasure of talking to really about the Coast Guard. So I have, you know, just excuse me, I'm a bit naive on it, right? How does it work when you join? Are you actually joining then with a job specialty?
No, so every enlisted person comes into the service as non-rated. You can either be a seaman, a fireman, or an airman. And I joined as a non-rate. I was an E1 in basic training, and then 6 months after, I was an E2. And then by the time I made E3, I was at my first air station, and I became an airman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Incredible. Talk to us about Coast Guard training, you know, your basic training and everything. How long is it? What are you guys doing? What's really the focus of it? You know, because I come from that Army background, right?
Yeah.
And even though I'm obviously a female, I was not going to be in the infantry, nor could I be. It's still very much infantry oriented, right? What you're learning, you know, and everything. What is your basic like? How long is it? What do you remember about it?
I remember quite a bit. Okay, so I was stationed permanent party at the training center in Cape May, New Jersey as a classroom instructor. So I went to basic training and it was 8 weeks, 52 days. It was a lot of classroom-based training. So it was really intense classroom training. We did have pretty intense like field training, as far as like we used the Marine Corps manual for close order drill. We used the Marine Corps manual for all our we had pretty intense field training. We had drill instructors that were crazy, and yeah, so they put us through the rigmarole. But the cool thing about the Coast Guard is that all the females can participate in all the jobs, even becoming rescue swimmers. And we've had a handful of women who have become rescue swimmers. So there was no differentiation in training. I actually was part, as an instructor, we kind of leveled the playing field, and the females were doing full body push-ups, and yeah, their PT test was similar to the male's PT test. Whereas like when I initially joined, like they were doing like push-ups on their knees and stuff. So I kind of helped lead a program that kind of standardized our PT test. But again, it was a lot of classroom training. We did 1 week at the range where we qualified on a 9mm Beretta, which was awesome. I'm trying to think what else about basic training. Yeah, well, while I was there as an instructor, we trained thousands more recruits than we had previously. The Coast Guard's a small branch.
Right.
At the time I was on, it was 38,000 active duty members. So like there's more New York City policemen in the city of New York than there are active duty Coast Guard. But the class size, class sizes were like quadruple the size that they were before 9/11. So we were like splitting companies and running like a record number of recruits through the training center, which was really cool to see. I even trained an Olympian who came.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came in as an enlisted man, and he actually got to compete in the Olympics while on active duty.
Oh my gosh!
So that was really really cool. It was really cool to get feedback from him because, like, you know, I was a classroom instructor at the gym, so I ran them through like weightlifting classes, swimming classes. I did their run tests on the track and stuff, and he obviously did excellent on the track. He beat my run record because I was the 1.5 mile record holder at the track, and obviously the Olympian beat me on the track. He gave me such great feedback. Like, you know, he told me that he felt I was as motivating as any of the coaches that he had ever been around, and it was really impressive to get that feedback from him. Obviously, I was highly motivated while I was on active duty. I really wanted to be a rescue swimmer, and I knew that was going to be really tough. I had to apply a year in advance. I waited to get my orders to A school, which it's run similar to how the Navy trains their personnel. So I got orders to A school, and I had been training all year at the training center as just on my own, push-ups, swimming, and calisthenics. I stopped lifting weights. That was a bit of advice that they had given me because most of the work that we were doing was against our own body weight. So it benefited you to be lean. I got attached to Air Station Atlantic City, which was, it was really just like 70 miles north of Cape May. So those rescue swimmers actually came twice a week to our pool in Cape May and did their training. So I even got to jump in the pool with them before I landed at Air Station Atlantic City. But I spent 5 months as an airman getting trained to prepare myself for A school. And these guys, the rescue swimmers at Atlantic City, they had just watched the National Geographic Inside, no, it's not Inside Bud. It was Bud's like 226 or something like that. They watched a documentary on basic underwater demolition SEAL training, and they had us, the airmen, like doing all these wacky exercises that they saw on the film. So they put us through some really intense training, and Atlantic City was known in the Coast Guard as preparing their airmen better than any other unit. So I was extremely well prepared for A school. I spent 5 months at the Aviation Technical Training Center in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, for rescue swimmer school. That training was intense. The instructors were top-notch guys. Like John Hall was my primary instructor. He's a veteran rescue swimmer of Air Station Kodiak. He was really intense. We had Bob Watson, Bob Watson, one of the most decorated rescue swimmers in the Coast Guard. We had Thor Wentz, who was just evil as a cadre. Like, he really pushed us hard, and he was always there too. Like, you needed an E7 or higher on the pool deck to do certain drills, and he made himself available to do these certain drills all the time. So we were always in the fire, in the crucible of training with Thor Wentz around. And you know, the funny thing is that those guys, my very instructors, they went on to portray rescue swimmer instructors in the movie The Guardian.
Really?
And yeah, they
got
gosh, Screen Actors Guild cards, and they got speaking parts in the film. And while we were there in Elizabeth City, the film crews that were making the movie The Guardian, they kept coming to the air station, and so we would basically put on a little dog and pony show where they would keep us on the meat grinder longer and do more PT, and then keep us in the pool deck and ratchet up the intensity, just in case, they wanted to film some of our training and make sure that it was like as good as it gets. So that brought the intensity of rescue swimmer school up quite a bit.
That's incredible.
having the film crews around.
Yeah, I bet. Um, what would you say, Aaron, was the most physically taxing and mentally taxing part about training to be a rescue swimmer?
Easily for me, it was survival school.
Okay.
They gave us classroom instruction on it, but when they put us in that survival environment, like it was like middle of the night. We swam across the Pasquotank River, which is some brackish river in North Carolina, and then just landed on some shoreline. And we were out there with nothing, but our rescue swimmer gear for 2 days. And we also did quite a bit of run training, which turned out to benefit me quite a bit. But it was we had a woman in our training class who was in great shape for rescue swimmer training. She would have made a great rescue swimmer. However, she struggled running. So the instructors knew that, and they made us run like crazy. We were at this college track, running stairs and running around the track, doing quarter-mile sprints every day. And I think it was partly in an attempt to help prepare her more, but also in an attempt to kind of weed her out, because it probably overtrained her a little bit, but it really trained me well. Like I came to rescue swimmer school with the focus of swimming. Like that's what I did, in high school and before high school, and I was ready to swim. Like that's my sport. Well, running became my sport at rescue swimmer school, and I beat the 2-mile run record, which I didn't think was possible, because the records at rescue swimmer school were harder than they were at basic training.
I'm sure, yeah.
I beat the 2-mile run record, which was a huge feather in my cap. I had perfect split times in both miles, and I was running like 450 something miles, which was incredible. I didn't know I was that fast, but again, I think them training our female, to help propel her into running really benefited me much more than it did her. So yeah, survival school was intense. Running at rescue swimmer school was really intense. And then just anytime the film crews were around, they ratcheted up intensity quite a bit.
What about mentally? What do you think was the most mentally challenging part about it?
Oh, man. So at the end of rescue swimmer school, we were packing parachutes, which was something that I thought was going to be really important. It wasn't for personnel. It was just for cargo. But one of the guys in our class was really kind of lackadaisical about it. Like, he didn't really care. And I think I saw him like skipping some steps or not checking some riser lines or something like that. And it really bothered me. He was supposed to be our class leader, and the guy was just, he didn't perform at the level that I thought that rescue swimmers should be at.
Right.
But he was making it through the program. And so that really bothered me. I wanted to be amongst peers who were at the highest level.
Right.
Guys weren't going to skip steps, guys that were really going to put out. And we had a guy in our class that didn't do that. And that was really the toughest part for me. I wasn't sure at that point. I had completed all the training, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be a rescue swimmer, because I didn't really think that it would be, I didn't want to be around guys that weren't totally squared away. And so that really bothered me quite a bit.
Thank you for talking to us about your training as a rescue swimmer, Aaron. That's absolutely incredible. Aaron, would you tell us about your famous rescue experience?
Yeah, I was called out to sea on December 8th, 2004. A Malaysian flagged freighter had lost power and was adrift in the Bering Sea. We got on scene, and the sea state was really intense. The winds were intense. There was snow everywhere. We had difficulty finding areas to land in rough areas, because of the wind and the high snow. There was a Coast Guard ship that was having trouble towing this vessel because of the high sea state. And we were on scene when the freighter put its starboard anchor down, and it made the ship a lot more stable of a position, of a platform to hoist from. So We moved in and picked up 9 of their sailors from their ship. We delivered them to the Coast Guard cutter Alex Haley that was underway out at sea. It was somewhat uneventful. It was really intense. And if you Google impressive helicopter piloting, you can see what the pilots went through. They were flying the aircraft up and down, all with, just to stay with the ship that was out at sea. So we got those guys to safety, and we were able to make a rough area landing. We took 9 more survivors from another H-60 that was out there hoisting with us, Coast Guard aircraft. We brought those 9 back to Dutch Harbor, Alaska, where they were met by Customs and Border Protection agents. We thought we were finished for the day. Like, we had rescued 18 people, and we had been out there all day, and the other Coast Guard helicopter was supposed to finish the rescue. Well, that aircraft departed the scene and went to pick up another crew, a fresh crew that could fly longer. And while they were en route, one of their part of their transmission started grinding gears, and all the chip detectors in the aircraft, little magnetic plugs that look for metal in the oil, they all started lighting up. So when they landed, the mechanics checked the aircraft, and the aircraft was down hard. It had they had to replace the input module in the field in Cold Bay, Alaska, which the Coast Guard does a lot of field maintenance, but this was a very large undertaking. So they couldn't take that aircraft back. There were still 8 sailors on the vessel that we were trying to rescue, and they called us on the phone. We had already shut down our aircraft. Yeah. I was on my way. A warrant officer that was stationed in Dutch Harbor, he picked me up and was taking me to get a government vehicle so I could collect the rest of the air crew. Okay. And while I was riding with him, he asked me about the conditions, what the rescue was like, and I described to him how the swell, how the waves would draw so much water out from underneath the freighter that you could see parts of the ship that would only be visible if it was pulled out of the water for dry dock maintenance. And I could tell by the look on his face that he was aghast. He thought it was wild. And I didn't really know any better. I had only flown for 20 hours in an H-60. This was my very first rescue. So once I saw his face, I kind of was like, oh my, that is intense. And so I get back with the government vehicle to pick up my air crew, and operations had called, and they literally said, we have some more ridiculous tasking for you. They said, we need you to go back out. And we told them that the aircraft needed maintenance. Our tail rotor had to be retorqued to its specifications, and they said that they would get maintenance to waive that requirement. And so we also told them that we had some gripes with the aircraft. Parts had broken off during some of the hoisting, and they said we would waive that as well. And then our aircraft commander said, well, we're over on the mission time. We started at 6 a.m. It was well past 6 p.m. at this time. And he said, we've done 12 hours of mission time. And he said, we'll waive that too. And the aircraft commander looked at all of us and said, what do you guys think? And I think unanimously, all at the same time, we all said we would go back out. So we all got in the aircraft. The aircraft commander, he went to go use the bathroom, and we jumped in the aircraft and started it up, rotors turning with one pilot. And that was something that I'd never seen done before. The H-60 is definitely not configured for single pilot operations. And once our aircraft commander got back in the aircraft, we took off, headed right back to where we were the whole day. And when we arrived, another Coast Guard helicopter flew right past us, hailed us on the radio, and said, we'd like to move in and pick up 4. You guys can move in and pick up the other 4, and then we'll go back to Dutch Harbor. And my aircraft commander, he was an Army Night Stalker pilot. He was a badass pilot. He had done some incredible helicopter flying. So and Google it, incredible helicopter flying, and you'll see him flying out in the Bering Sea. But when he heard this other Coast Guard helicopter say that they wanted to move in and perform part of the rescue, he said, we just went from hero to zero. And he told them on the radio, he said, we'll move in and get all 8 and you cover us. And so they agreed, and we just immediately went right to the same area that we had been hoisting all day long, and we put our rescue basket down on the deck, and all 8 sailors were standing on the ship ready to get hoisted, and none of them would move towards the basket. They were frozen where they were. And so the flight mechanic brings the basket up, and the aircraft commander looks back there and he sees the basket in the cabin. He says, get that basket on the deck now. And the flight mechanic puts it back down. We're both in the window, like pointing at these guys.
Yeah.
Get in the basket, and nothing. So the flight mechanic brings the basket up. The aircraft commander looks at me and he said, Bean, get their asses in that basket. And I went to go put on my rescue swimmer ensemble, grab my mask and snorkel and my fins and all that stuff. Well, he said, no, Bean, get in the basket. And I had never been basket deployed as a rescue swimmer. That was not a procedure that we were practicing in training. Yeah. So I complied. I said, yes, sir. I hopped right in the basket. Down I went. I climbed up the deck of the ship, grabbed one of the survivors, stuffed him in the basket, and up he went. And we kept doing this, operation for about 4 or 5 sailors. And then at about the 5th one, a huge wave had come over the side of the ship, and it broke right on my chest, just knocked me down.
Oh my gosh.
I was swept like hundreds of feet down the deck of the ship. When I stood up, I signaled I'm okay, but it was the other Coast Guard helicopter that was covering us that I was standing underneath. And so I was really taken by that. And I was like, okay, I got to get back to the hoist area. And I climbed back there. I grab another one of the survivors, and down comes the rescue basket. Well, this time it had discharged some static electricity onto the deck of the ship, and which is normal. That the aircraft, especially in a saltwater environment, does generate some static. And when I saw it discharge, I thought that it had grounded. Well, I grabbed the rescue basket, and it electrocuted my right arm. Like it.
Oh my gosh!
Hard, and I was able to let go, but I stuffed the survivor in the basket right afterwards, and up he went. I pray to God he wasn't being electrocuted, but he climbed in, he went up. I'm soaked. The aircraft is soaked. The whole deck of the ship is soaked, and I get a couple more guys into the basket. They get up into the aircraft, and I'm standing on the deck of the ship. It's just me and the captain, and another huge wave comes over the side of the ship, and it crashes. Well, it hits just the side of the ship. I thought it was going to crash over us. Well, it hits just the side of the ship, and so I thought, we're good. And I turned to the captain. I said, let's go, let's go, let's go. I look over. I see this giant green wall of seawater, and I hear the number 1 engine shut down. I hear the number 2 engine shut down, and then I watch the aircraft fly forward and down. Once the rotor system went below the deck of the ship, it broke apart. You could hear it hit the side of the ship. I kind of, with my helmet, just kind of ducked and covered. And when I looked up, there were titanium tip caps from the rotor system right there on the deck of the ship. And there was an alarm going off, like a warning alarm on the ship that we were in trouble. And as an EMT, I knew, you don't want to be in an environment where you're not safe. The rescuer needs to be safe in order to help the survivors. And so I kind of compartmentalized what had happened with the other aircraft. I knew that I was in danger. I talked to the captain. He said, "Are they okay? Are they okay?" And I said, "No, they're dead." And that was something that I truly believed. I said, the other rescue swimmers at my unit, we trained, we trained to egress from a helicopter when it crashed. We practiced that all the time. But the guys all colloquially, they all knew that if we went down, we probably wouldn't survive. It would be violent enough to destroy the aircraft and us inside of it. So I initially thought that they were all dead. I told the captain, I was able to take the captain's radio. I called a mayday. The Coast Guard ship that was underway. They heard the mayday call out. they had already received a mayday because there was another Coast Guard aircraft right above the crash site. They called a mayday in instantly. So mine was like a minute late, and they told us to stand by. And I got another call from them about 10 minutes later. They just asked, what was going on. And but by that time, I had surveyed the crash site. I saw our Coast Guard helicopter upside down, floating in the water. I saw 2 Coast Guard crew members on one side with their retroreflective gear and their orange vests. And then I saw another Coast Guard guy on the other side with his retroreflective gear and his orange vest. And I saw the rescue basket from the other helicopter, the cover aircraft, going down. So I knew that, they were going to get help. And
oh my gosh.
I kind of hunkered down with the captain of the ship. He wanted to go up to the pilot house, and I started walking down the deck of this ship. It's a 738-foot container, bulk container.
Man.
And the waves were crashing over us. And so I told him, I was like, it's probably not safe for us to transit while the sea state is as high as it is. So I told him just to hunker down in this covered area on the bow with me, and we hunkered down. The Coast Guard cutter Alex Haley called me on the radio, and they said, we want you to talk to our captain. And he wasn't available. Like, when they called me on the radio, they said, we'll get back to you. Give us about 10 minutes. And they had mentioned to me, they said, our captain's son is a Marine in Iraq now. And they said, he's not going to leave you out there. And I said, well, that's great. I felt good about that. And it was Commander Bell who got on the radio just 10 minutes later. He asked, how it was. I was able to secure a life raft because I knew I needed flotation if we were going to have to get in the water. And I let him know that I had secured a life raft and that we were in a relatively safe position. I let him know that the alarms were going off, but he was a really calm voice on the radio. It was nice to hear him, ensure that, I wasn't going to be left out there. Right, and I knew I wasn't going to be left out there. There was a Coast Guard C-130 overhead. There was that other cover aircraft. When they departed scene, though, I knew that, they had full cabin. They had hoisted a number of survivors from the plane crash, and then their aircraft is smaller, so it's limited on fuel and the weight, how much it can carry. So they departed scene. And rescue swimmers are unique. In our training, we're prepared to be left out at sea by ourselves. So our instructors would always say, we're the only ones that go behind enemy lines by ourselves. And so I was somewhat prepared to be out there by myself.
Yeah.
But we were out there for about 4 hours. While we were out there, the captain and I, we had lost power. There were generators running on the ship, and the half of the ship that we were on, the lights went out. We heard this sonic boom, like shook the ship. It was loud. And a minute later, the ship ripped apart. It just peeled. One half floated away. The half that wasn't anchored, it ran aground on some underwater rocks.
Oh my gosh.
And it was lit up like a Christmas tree. You could still see all the lights, and the waves were just crushing it. And we were on the anchored half, and it just slowly started to sink. So eventually the smaller Coast Guard aircraft came back. They put their basket down on the deck. They were 200 feet above the vessel when they lowered their basket, which the procedures, the book says a vessel out at sea, you're supposed to be at like a 30-foot hover above the vessel.
Okay.
Well, they had just watched a helicopter crash at a 30-foot hover. So they started off at 200 feet. They came down a little bit when they were having trouble getting their basket down, but they used all 220 feet of cable in order to get their rescue basket down onto the deck of the ship. I put the captain in the basket, and he went up on a roller coaster ride 200 feet up to the aircraft, and I literally held on to a bolt that was holding one of the cargo covers down, and waves were crashing over, and then they miraculously got the basket right next to me again. I hopped in, and up I went on this swinging roller coaster ride. I knew I was safe when Greg Gibbons, the flight mechanic, put his boot out the aircraft. And that's something that they do on this smaller aircraft, is when the flight mechanic's combat boot is hanging out the door, you can grab their boot. And I grabbed his boot.
Okay.
And I knew at that moment that I was safe. Like in the H-60, the mechanics don't do that. We can grab the landing gear or one of the auxiliary fuel tanks, but to grab another Coast Guardsman boot really made me feel like safe. And we got an aircraft. I plugged into the comms, and they said, "How are you doing, Bean?" And I was like, "I'm mighty fine." And they said, "Good. We're going to use you as the rescue swimmer if we can find some survivors from that helicopter crash." And so we stayed on scene doing search patterns of the area, looking for survivors. Okay. Really, we were just surveying the wreckage. It was an awesome sight to see. Like the sea state was so huge, and it was like swallowing this giant vessel up. And we were in awe of just what we saw. And then we returned when we were low on fuel, and the aircraft commander, Tim Easton, of this small aircraft, he called his wife and said, "Hey, if you see us on CNN, like, everybody's okay." Like, we were in a big rescue. And, he started to cry. And I was like, that's when I realized, like, the real gravity of the situation. Because I looked up to the pilots that I was with. They were all, like, superior officers and incredible pilots and great leaders. So when I saw him kind of break down, I realized that we had just been in some pretty serious shit. So we all got back to the Grand Aleutian Hotel. My crew was there, safe and drunk. I had been out at sea for 4.5 hours, and they were out at the Grand Aleutian, and they wanted me to join them. I was seasick, like really seasick. I still felt like I was moving. I had pretty awful motion sickness. So I just stayed up in the operations center. They set up a command systems for incident command. And I just kind of sat there and just waited. There wasn't much I could do. And then the admiral in charge of the PAC area came and picked us up the next day and flew us back to Kodiak. And when we got to the hangar that I worked in, all 300 aviators assigned to the unit were there, and they welcomed us with open arms, and they let us stand around and talk about the rescue and what we had endured. And it was really, really special to see those guys there. Most of them really just worked on the aircraft. And so one of the guys, he said to me, he was like, "Man, I had just finished completing fuel system maintenance on that aircraft. Like, they got new braided fuel lines, and they had to dig, they had to dig through the aircraft and get into the fuel cells and stuff." And he was like, man, he was really upset that, the aircraft was a total loss, but he was grateful that we survived, but really sad that he lost all that work that he had done on the aircraft. So it was just nice to be back and kind of, be with my comrades. Yeah. Share some camaraderie. And then it was world tour after that. I was on the nightly news, and I was on Good Morning America. I had dinner with the commandant. I met Ted Stevens, who was the Speaker of the House at the time and third in line for president. I went to the State of the State address at the governor's mansion. It was a big world. That's
absolutely incredible. Aaron, I want to go back to that December day with you and ask some more questions. There was so much happens, during this rescue that you go out for, starting, you've already been out there for a 12-hour day, which would normally be a day. All kinds of things get waived for you guys to go back out. I want to go back to the point where, you were on the ship, you've already loaded several men into the basket, and a wave comes crashing up, hits you, in the chest and throws you back. From a physical standpoint, what was that like, having, an ocean wave crash into you like that?
It was intense. It felt like it had something punched me in the chest. I was, my feet were swept out from underneath me. I was just kind of tumbling and sliding down the deck. I panicked for a quick second that I was going to get swept out to sea.
Yeah.
I was able to get my footing because I was in my aircrew coveralls, and part of that ensemble is we had these La Sportiva mountaineering boots, and I put like crampon style ice cleats on over them because it was so snowy and windy. Like whenever we were walking on the ramp, like to and from the aircraft, it was just treacherous walking. One of the pilots, like he got blown over and like fell down on the ramp before we even got out to sea. So it was thankful that I had those on and that I wasn't in my rescue swimmer ensemble, because the little booties that come with my rescue swimmer suit, they're slippery as all get out. They're designed to be worn with fins. So I had some La Sportivas on, and yeah, it was those boots and those crampons were able to keep me on the ship. I basically had to claw my way back to where I was after getting that way.
So subsequently, you would end up being electrocuted in the right arm. Like, as you said, you grab onto that basket and you're electrocuted. What's going through your mind as in that moment? You still have work to do. There's still men on that ship to be rescued, but you yourself are being electrocuted.
It was okay. So I have to say that my adrenaline was full bore. And
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
Not to just brush it off like some measly incident, but I did not let it faze me at all. Like I was so motivated and determined by that point. Like I said, I likely shoved a survivor in the basket who he himself was probably getting electrocuted.
Right.
I didn't know. I had just experienced that pop, and I let go and pushed the guy right into the basket. So I didn't really let it faze me. My adrenaline was so high. There was a point during the night where I just took a deep breath and I said, it's okay to relax. And then instantly in the back of my mind, it said, this is not the time to relax. And I felt like a rush of adrenaline. My senses got heightened, my vision, my sense of smell, everything was on fire. And so, yeah, that electrocution really did nothing to stop me on the day. But, looking back at it after, getting diagnosed with PTSD and kind of talking about the trauma, like what actually happened that night, that event was probably pretty significant if you think about it. Like just the getting that much charge in your body while you're already charged on adrenaline was, it just fired off all the neurons that were available. They were firing full bore. So
yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, that's absolutely incredible. And to think, right, that you're suffering this incredible injury at the same time, and rescuing these men, and right, you go in this other mode, this other place. But it doesn't end there. The day doesn't end there. You don't get to go into that basket. You have to stay on that ship. You would go on to see the H-60 rescue helicopter go down. How, so you've already been electrocuted. You've already put in this incredible day, adrenaline at complete peak. How are you able to stay focused, stay mission ready, stay just in your drive? Because as you described it to us, normally when a helicopter goes down like that, you expect no survivors.
Yeah, I compartmentalized what had happened to my crew. Like I initially thought that they would have perished. I saw that they had survived. I saw some Coast Guard guys in the water. I knew that, I needed to stay safe. I needed to keep the captain of the ship safe. We were in a relatively safe spot. There was another helicopter out there. To be honest with you, I didn't want to mess anything else up. I wanted to be out there. I wanted that other aircraft to continue to hoist, not hear me on the radio saying, come get me.
Yeah.
I was happy to be where I was. I knew that they were working hard to get the survivors out of that crash. I wasn't surprised when they departed scene. from what I heard from the pilots of that other aircraft, they were able to rescue one of the sailors who went in with the crash, and he was unconscious when they got him up to the aircraft. He was covered in oil, and he was hypothermic. So they got him in the aircraft, and he was hurt. They called the Alex Haley, the Coast Guard ship. They said, "Hey, we need to bring this guy to you. He's hurt." And they said, "No, take him to the hospital." And that's exactly what they did. So that guy he survived. He regained consciousness in the aircraft and was treated for hypothermia at the airport. But I was able to just keep the captain warm. He was in street. Okay. So like I gave him some neoprene gloves. Actually, I gave him my flight gloves, and I put neoprene gloves on my own hands, and I really just compartmentalized what happened. And I didn't want to be on the radio. I didn't want to bother anybody. I knew that I called once for help. I said I'd like a C-130 to come drop a life raft, because I knew that I had packed all the parachutes. I'd packed all the life rafts. I knew that C-130s had them, in the back of their cargo area. So I was like, let's have one, because I had lost the life raft that I had secured to the waves. The waves came and took the life raft that I had secured. When I heard that they were, covering another aircraft coming from Air Station Kodiak, I understood it. I had flown from Kodiak to Dutch Harbor before. It's a long flight all over the ocean, and it made sense that aircraft got cover. It was really just me compartmentalizing what had happened. And to be honest, I took some of I drew motivation from other rescue swimmers. It sucks to say this, but Joe Ungeheyer was one of the rescue swimmers at my unit. He had done an incredible rescue where he lifted a refrigerator off of a fisherman in his fishing vessel. And Ungeheyer, he lost his battle to cancer, but he was still alive while I was out at sea, and I used his heroism to kind of push me to go out there and secure that life raft. Because to get the life raft, I had to walk on the deck where the helicopter had just crashed, and I really didn't want to be out there. That's right where the waves were coming towards us, and so I drew on the motivation of some of my other guys that had done heroic things before. Because to be totally honest, I had never done anything heroic before this. This was my first rescue, so I didn't really know what I needed to do to step up, but I knew that I didn't want to be a bother, and radioing for help every 10 minutes. And I didn't want to relax. I knew I needed to keep my adrenaline going. And it was really, really unique to, I took a deep breath. I was able to just be calm for 1 minute, but it wasn't even 1 minute before something happened. And it was like all my senses were lit up again. Like, this is not the place to relax. Like, we are in a survival situation. So to be able to kind of harness that ability and to notice my body doing that was really, it was a really powerful thing for me. It helped me feel like I was going to be okay, that my body was going to respond to this and really give me my best, let me do my best.
So you're out there, waves are crashing into you. It's winter, it's December. How are you staying warm? How are you not going into hypothermia? What does that look like?
We're not in the water. So I was getting hit by huge waves. Even the ship started eventually dumping water out of these air valves that keep the cargo dry. Like the ship was full of soybeans, and then seawater filled those cargo holds. And so we're soaking wet, but I have an anti-exposure suit on. I have a Nomex dry suit. The captain is literally in jeans and a t-shirt. He was not prepared to go out to sea. So he's just kind of huddled behind me, shivering. Yeah. I gave him some gloves, but for 4 hours and 30 minutes, he was really just exposed to the elements out there. I was pretty secure in that I had a dry suit on. I had adrenaline going.
Right.
Yeah, that's really that kept me warm. Once he got in the aircraft, the captain, you know, they were able to warm him up.
Right.
My pilots, the pilots up in Alaska were always so awesome. Like, even though they're like, you know, their environment is climate controlled, and like they, you know, they do a lot of work piloting the aircraft. They would just turn on the heat as hot as it goes, as high as it goes, and just bake the aircraft as soon as we get inside. And it, you know, even when they're not even cold, right? They would just suffer up the sauna temperatures in order to warm us up. And that was something that every Alaskan pilot would do for us. And that was something that I was always grateful for.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure. So we're still on the ship though, and it's still not time to come up. You described hearing a sonic boom.
Yeah.
And then the ship breaking apart. Take us through that moment when that ship breaks apart.
Yeah, it happened in a sequence of events. So I'm standing on the bow. All of a sudden the lights go out, and I'm like, what? I turned to the captain. I said, what happened? And he said, the ship is breaking. And I looked back, and I could still see lights on the back half of the ship. Like, the pilot house had huge floodlights.
Okay.
But the side that we were on, the power went out. I thought it was strange. Then just 2 minutes after the power went out, I heard the boom, like something shook the ship, like, which I only assume was like us hitting some rocks.
Okay.
And 2 minutes after that huge boom, the ship just pulled itself apart, just peeled it back. The pilot house and the stern of the ship just floated away because it was not anchored, and the side that we were on just started to sink down a little bit. It stayed pretty secure. We didn't like move around much, but it started to lower itself into the water quite a bit. And you could see the other half, like all the decks of the ship, you could see wires like still sparking and arcing. And, you know, that other half of the ship landed in this really precarious situation where, like, it was hard aground, the lights were on, and it was showing the waves that were coming directly to us. Like, it would highlight the waves. And so it was just a wild sight to see. It was really incredible.
Holy man. I can't even imagine what that must be like. So Aaron, you know, going back to the beginning, you know, you talked about seeing the video, right, of the rescue, the little girl in the water and everything, and how incredibly moved you were by this, and you wanted to do this. You were trained as a rescue swimmer. Like you said, you're trained to be out there alone. You know, we've had a helicopter go down. We've had you get electrocuted, you know, waves crashing into you. The ship has broke apart. Aaron, you're trained to rescue, and now it's a situation where you need to be rescued yourself. What was it like being rescued after all that you had gone through that day?
Yeah, it's so funny. That part of the night was it was really intense. Like, you know, I kind of vectored in the aircraft when they returned to scene. Man, was it nice to have them return to scene. You know, once their strobe lights and everything were over us, I was really happy, because that's where I was most comfortable. Being underneath a loud aircraft with tons of rotor wash, you know, and flashing lights, and, you know, having to, you know, communicate with them and get them into the right position to pick people up. And, you know, putting the captain in the rescue basket and setting him up first, like, it put me in a really awesome and kind of like sacred position where I was the last person to leave the ship. And I was like, I was acutely aware of that in that moment. Like, the captain was up. I knew he was safe. I was holding on to this ship. Man, they asked us when they were hovering over us, they said, can you guys move back as far as you can? And we walked so far back on this ship that there was nothing underneath us. It was just the steel that was part of the deck. Like, the whole cargo area underneath was ripped out and had washed away. So we were standing on like this tiny little diving board of of a platform, and I was holding onto this huge bolt that was covered in tar oil, and getting showered with jet fuel, and
oh my gosh,
it was awful. And when I saw that rescue basket land behind me, man, I got in, and I was I was so grateful. And
yeah,
the thing that I always tell people, like, as soon as I got in the aircraft, as soon as I grabbed Greg Gibbons' boot, like,
yeah,
they adopted me as part of their air crew. I became the rescue swimmer on the Coast Guard 6513, and that's a part of the story that, like, it's left out. Like, I edited the Wikipedia page about my rescue because it said that the rescue swimmer had to be rescued from the aircraft, and I said no, I was recovered. Like, it was a real recovery. Like, if when they got that plane back to Air Station Kodiak and they had to fill out the paperwork, they put RX, a real recovery of the rescue swimmer, on the paperwork. So I was part of their crew. I volunteered to help them, pull survivors out of the ocean if we found them. And that's a part of the story that really it gets left out. I got a meritorious service medal for being the rescue swimmer on the 6020, but I was also the rescue swimmer on the 6513, and that's really something that I'm most proud of. Like, I love those aircrafts. Tim Eason, Rob Cornexel, and Greg Gibbons are the best aviators that I know. They all got the Distinguished Flying Cross, and their careers just went to the moon. And I felt most proud of being associated with those guys afterwards. And I wasn't rescued. I was recovered from the ship in the end.
Well, I'm glad we got to talk about that, and thank you for explaining to us that too, because that is very important, right? You weren't rescued, you were recovered that day. Absolutely, absolutely phenomenal. Aaron, thank you so much for your service to our great country. I want to talk about what it was like once you came back. You said you were greeted, everyone, 300 plus people there to greet you all as the heroes you truly are. What was it like, though, in the coming days and weeks after? Like you said, you really went on a tour of publicity started. Talk to us about that and what that was kind of like emotionally.
Looking back now, I realize that I was in a bit of distress. So I get back to the unit, and I got to be with the rest of the unit, and that was amazing. But the very next day, everyone at the unit started holiday routines. So it was like a 6 days on, 6 days off, and I was supposed to be off for 6 days, but we had a press conference, and so I had to be in uniform and sit before the press and answer all these questions and do all these interviews. And one of the interviewers from the Alaska Daily News had been really pestering my parents back home, and they asked me for an interview after the press conference, and I was like, no, I'm not excited to talk to you guys. You guys were really pestering my family. And that was really my first dose of like what it's like to be reported to be reported on in the news. I watched some of the footage of the press conference. Some of our public affairs people got to record it, and they were like, man, Bean, you did a great job at telling your story. And the news media did a terrible job of reporting about it. Like, they got, critical details wrong every time. And that was really frustrating for me. I got pretty messed up after being on this rescue. I was grounded from flying for 2 weeks, which really bothered me. And this was a standard procedure. It was a Class A mishap, more than $1 million worth of damage and loss of lives. It says the aircrew has to be grounded for 2 weeks, and so I took that. And once my 2 weeks was up, I wanted to get back in the aircraft. Well, I had a lot of people watching me, my command master chief, and everybody was really kind of eyes on. Like, I failed a barracks room inspection because I had some pyrotechnics in in an ammo can, which I thought it was cool. Apparently it wasn't cool. And so I got gigged on my barracks inspection. I had to do extra duty. And like all of this was, it was just, it added up. And like eventually my command was like, you need to take some time off, Bean. And I said, okay. I went back home to Colorado and I really got to kind of decompress a little bit. But when I went back, like, I struggled quite a bit. Yeah. Like, one thing I did, and this was one of my avoidance behaviors for PTSD, is like I read the Air Operations Manual, like cover to cover, and memorized it. I read the Rescue Swimmers Manual cover to cover and memorized it. I flew with them in my flight bag and referred to them like constantly while I was out there, because I say it was an avoidance behavior. I didn't want to be in a crash again. That was awful. It was terrifying. There were times where I didn't think I was going to survive. So I didn't want to be in that situation again. And so part of my avoidance behavior was this extreme adherence to these procedures and checklists and manuals. And it turned out to be an okay coping mechanism while on active duty, right? Because everybody else was familiar with these procedures. It was standard, and I wasn't off the reservation. I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, and it helped me. I wrote number 1 on the standardization test. Like I aced all my exams. Like it made me a better aviator. But I mean, other people started noticing like how intense I was about this. And it's like, after being in a scenario so intense, and then being in more intense scenarios over and over and over again, I know it's not in the diagnosis manual for disorders, but I had complex PTSD because my first rescue after this crash, our aircraft caught on fire while we were flying it. And the book said, land immediately. We did the checklist, and it said land immediately. Well, we had a guy in the aircraft who was having a heart attack. We had a flight surgeon who had done an EKG and said, this guy needs cardiac interventions in a hospital immediately. And there was a runway in sight. We could have landed on a gravel runway and shut down the aircraft and fixed it there, but this guy would have been suffering. So as a crew, we all agreed to continue flying back to the air station. Crash Fire Rescue was there when we landed, and we had to repair the aircraft because the fire had damaged the windscreen in front of the aircraft commander. So I was repeatedly exposed to these intense situations, and it did not help me out mentally, and when I got to college though, I was able to use those adaptive, those avoidance behaviors, read everything that they find me, and, and then write, about it. And I was a very mechanical writer. So I was able to use those avoidance behaviors, to my advantage, for a while, but eventually, people stopped, they didn't like being around me when I was keyed up, when I was spun up. It's intense, right? And I always just tell myself, society, they don't tolerate, the military at their, at the high speed that they operate. It's just not okay. And I realized that, it was making people uncomfortable. I was having these really intense interactions with people. And so I finally, went to the VA and got help. And, and it's night and day now. I'm able to still be myself, but not get fully spun up on stuff that would normally really get me going.
So we'll definitely talk more about that, Aaron. But we want to thank you again, for your service to our great country. Thanks. We will be wrapping up part 1 of Aaron's story today, and we will return next Wednesday at 1 Eastern with part 2 of Aaron's story. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on today, sharing your story and your light with us all. It was absolutely tremendous. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in this week for another episode highlighting one of our incredible Catch a Lift Fund members. Thank you again, Aaron, for your service and sharing your story with us. Don't forget to join us every Wednesday live at 1 p.m. Eastern and on YouTube for a chance to win Cal Swag and to chat with your brothers and sisters. If you like today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and leave us a review on your favorite streaming service. Until next week, keep it real and stay Cal strong.